Chapter 1 of the Radio Planet. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Radio Planet by Milne Farley. Chapter 1. "It's too bad that Miles Cabot can't see this," I exclaimed as my eye fell on the following item. Signals from Mars failed to reach Harvard. Cambridge, Massachusetts, Wednesday. The Harvard College radio station has for several weeks been in receipt of fragmentary signals of extraordinarily long wavelength, Professor Hammond announced yesterday. So far as it has been possible to test the direction of the source of these waves, it appears that the direction has a 24-hour cycle, thus indicating that the origin of these waves is some point outside the Earth. The university authorities will express no opinion as to whether or not these messages come from Mars. Miles alone of all the radio engineers of my acquaintance was competent to surmount these difficulties and thus enable the Cambridge savants to receive with clearness the message from another planet. 12 months ago he would have been available, for he was then quietly visiting at my farm, after 5 Earth years spent on the planet Venus, where, by the aid of radio, he had led the Cupians to victory over their oppressors, a human-brained race of gigantic black ants. He had driven the last ant from the face of continental Poros, and had won and wed the Princess Lilla, who had borne him a son to occupy the throne of Cupia. While at my farm, Cabot had rigged up a huge radio set and a matter transmitting apparatus, with which he had presumably shot himself back to Poros on the night of the big October storm which had wrecked his installation. I showed the newspaper item to Mrs. Farley and lamented on Cabot's absence. Her response opened up an entirely new line of thought. Said she, "Doesn't the very fact that Mr. Cabot isn't here suggest to you that this may be a message not from Mars, but from him? Or perhaps from the Princess Lilla, inquiring about him in case he has failed in his attempt at return?" That had never occurred to me. How stupid! What had I better do about it, if anything, I asked. Drop Professor Hammond a line? But Mrs. Farley was afraid that I would be taken for a crank. That evening, when I was over in town, the clerk in the drugstore waylaid me to say that there had been a long-distance phone call from me, in what I please call a certain Cambridge number. So after waiting an interminable time in the stuffy booth with my hands full of dimes, nickels, and quarters, I finally got my party. "Mr. Farley?" "Speaking." "This is Professor Kellogg, O.D. Kellogg," the voice replied. It was my friend of the Harvard math faculty, the man who had analyzed measurements of the streamlined projectile in which Miles Cabot had shot to earth the account of the first part of his adventures on Venus. Some further adventures Miles had told me in person during his stay on my farm. "Professor Hammond thinks he is getting Mars on the air," the voice continued. "Yes," I replied, "I judge as much from what I read in this morning's paper. But what do you think?" Kellogg's reply gave my sluggish mind the second jolt which it had received that day. "Well," he said, "in view of the fact that I am one of the few people among your readers who take your radio stories seriously, I think that Hammond is getting Venus. Can you run up here and help me try and convince him?" And so it was that I took the early boat next morning for Boston, and had lunch with the 2 professors. As a result of our conference, a small committee of engineers returned with me to Edgartown that evening, for the purpose of trying to repair the wrecked radio set which Miles Cabot had left on my farm. They utterly failed to comprehend the matter transmitting apparatus, and so, after the fallen tower had been re-erected and the rubbish cleared away, they had devoted their attention to the restoration of the conversational part of the set. To make a long story short, we finally restored it, and with the aid of some old blueprints of Cabot's which Mrs. Farley, like Swiss Family Robinson's wife, produced from somewhere, I was the first to try the earphones, and was rewarded by a faint bizz like the song of a north woods blackfly. In conventional radio
Sample complete. Ready to continue?